What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. Wrist is almost fully healed. For those of you who said what to do, thank you. So here we are again. Sergei Lavrov storming into the stage like a broken record player that can only scream, NATO bad, Russia is good, Russia is innocent, Europe is bad. At a G20 summit in the United Nations, at whatever international cocktail party he can sneak into, he repeats the very same Putin's conspiracy theory. The West has declared war on Russia. The poor Kaliningrad enclave is surrounded by monsters, and Moscow will deliver a decisive response. He paints Russia as the eternal victim, as if Russian tanks on Kiev's street in 2022 never happened, as if missiles were not smashing into Ukrainian power plants, as if hundreds of thousands of Russian men were not being dragged off the streets to fight. But here's the problem. Behind the smoke, the chest thumping, and the decisive response talk lies a crumbling, very fragile reality. It is the Kremlin who is terrified. So today, let's rip apart Lavrov's nonsense in 4 chapters. First, the Kremlin's victim complex and how it turns every Western move into an existential threat. Second, the Kaliningrad obsession and why Russian politicians think that all NATO generals are doing is openly talking about wiping it off the map. Third, the radar project that Moscow calls deterrence, but the West sees as a giant neon sign of desperation. And finally, fourth, the most important part, the voices that Lavrov refuses to acknowledge. The people of Kaliningrad themselves, who do not want to be pawns in this chess match and secretly dream of breaking free from Moscow's grip. Let's get straight into it. Lavrov has turned "we are under attack" into his personal TED Talk. At the G20, he accused NATO and the Europe of directly waging war through the hands of Ukraine. His literal quote. At the United Nations, he shouted that European leaders are brainwashing their people into thinking war with Russia is inevitable. He called out Denmark, Poland, and the Baltic states for militarizing islands and seas. And of course, he repeated the sacred Kremlin gospel. Russia never wanted this fight. Russia never planned to attack NATO. Russia is pure as snow. I mean, it's not like Russian drones ever crossed Ukrainian borders into Europe, right? Whether accidentally or on purpose. According to him, it is European missiles and drones that target Russia, controlled by Ukrainians, of course. But let's pause for a second. If Moscow did not want this fight, why is there a war at all? Who rolled tanks into Ukraine in February 2022? Who launched missiles at Odessa and Kharkov? Who dug trenches in Zaporozhye? This is the absurd theater of Russian diplomacy. Pretend aggression is defense, and call defense aggression. And when Lavrov screams about NATO tightening a ring around Eurasia, like even the Asian part of Russia, I mean, come on. It sounds less like strategy and more like paranoia therapy. NATO did not expand because Brussels was itching to poke the bear. It expanded because every neighbor of Russia looked at Moscow's track record and said, nope, we are not going to trust them. Sorry about that. Finland and Sweden did not suddenly join NATO because they love US bases on their territory. They joined because Putin reminded the whole world that Russian tanks do so what these Russian tanks do to friendly nations. What's worse, Lavrov's constant fear-mongering is not even aimed at foreign leaders anymore. Russian elite already realized that it's near impossible to make smart people believe their lies. So they focused on those who will. It is now aimed at Russians themselves, Russian people. Lavrov needs to convince the population that starving through sanctions, losing sons on the battlefield, and seeing the economy bleed out, that all these things are necessary sacrifices, because NATO is coming, and one day it will come, for you, personally. I mean, it is a regime of paranoia. The bigger the lies, the easier it is to hide the failures. More recently, he switched his attention to Kaliningrad region, that small part of Russia right inside Europe's heart. Let's see what he says about that region in our next chapter, but first, let me do something interesting. Alright, let's briefly address the elephant in the room. Imagine you are in an hour-long business meeting trying to take notes and listen at the same time. It's almost impossible, something will always be missing. Well, same here until I discovered this little pin on my yellow hoodie. It is called PLAUD Notepin, the world's most wearable AI note taker. It records crystal clear audio in 112 languages and then uses AI to instantly summarize the conversation, turn it into actionable to-do list, and even brainstorm ideas with you. Whether it's a university lecture, a doctor's appointment, a client call, or just one of those spontaneous genius ideas, PLAUD Notepin lets you stay fully focused on the moment, while it handles the notes for you. But here's the real magic. PLAUD comes with the Ask PLAUD, a ChatGPT-like function. While fully compliant with both US and EU privacy and data security requirements, such as SOC 2, GDPR and HIPAA, Ask PLAUD learns from your meeting history to understand your unique needs and then acts as your AI meeting secretary. Literally. Need help drafting an email? Just ask AI. Want to pull data for a report? Ask AI. It can even help you delegate tasks to your team, all with minimal effort on your part. In fact, I recorded the entire promo, so the summary will appear next to me right now, in case you want to quickly overview the details and the features. But wait. There is more. I also recorded the entire today's episode, and the summary will appear at the very end of the video to demonstrate even more outstanding functionality of PLAUD AI note takers. So keep watching if you are curious to see the results. If you are ready to save hours of note taking and finally focus 100% on the conversation, check out PLAUD Notepin for yourself. Use my code DUDE in the link in the description or scan this QR code you see right now on the screen to get 20% off. A very small investment for a tool that can give you back hundreds of hours every single year. Thanks so much PLAUD for sponsoring this video, and now back to the program. Now let's talk about Kaliningrad, the Russian military's favorite obsession. Lavrov insists the European Union is openly plotting to invade it. That NATO generals casually talk about erasing it in an unheard of time. That Danish forces are even deploying anti-ship systems in Bornholm. Poland and Lithuania are tightening border security. And every time this region is mentioned, Moscow rattles its saber like a medieval knight in rusty armor. Kaliningrad is Russia's very odd child. Geographically, at least, it is cut off from its motherland, completely wedged between European countries, closer to Berlin than it is to Moscow. The Kremlin calls it a fortress, but in reality it's literally a pressure cooker. For NATO, it's both a threat and a liability. NATO commanders like Christopher Donhao did mention how quickly they could take it if Putin goes completely ballistic. And I mean, they're not wrong. Kaliningrad is surrounded. It is isolated. And in modern warfare, its military bases could be flattened before Moscow even knows what is being happened. So why does Russia cling to it like a crown jewel? Because Kaliningrad symbolizes great power projection. It is the westernmost flag on the map, the only outpost Moscow can point to and say, see, we're still in Europe. That's why NATO threats sting so much, because they cut into Russia's fragile pride. It's not just about a strategy, it is about humiliation. If Kaliningrad is vulnerable, Russia itself, and more importantly Putin, looks vulnerable. But here is the irony. The louder Moscow screams about defending Kaliningrad, the more it exposes how scared it is of losing it. And NATO knows it. That is why the rhetoric about wiping it off the face of the earth is so effective. It forces Moscow into the role of the trembling fortress, trapped in its own paranoia. Europe already found, as you can see, the easiest trigger point of Putin's regime, and they're not afraid to push from time to time where it hurts the most. And since Kaliningrad is so far from Russia's mainland, another dilemma that the Kremlin faces is that they need to spend disproportionate amount of money to simply defend this small piece of land. Kaliningrad, besides being Russia's most once again western fortress, it was one of the most, if not the most expensive fortress to maintain. Let's talk about some of these defensive techniques they are using to protect Kaliningrad in our next chapter. Of course, Moscow does not just rely on words. It builds monuments of paranoia. Case in point, well, this massive radar installation currently rising in Kaliningrad. Western intelligence calls it unprecedented, a 1,600-meter wide array of antennas designed for surveillance, reconnaissance and communications, a technological eye glaring over the Baltic Sea. To Russian media, it's proof of strength. To Lavrov, it's a warning. We can see everything. We can neutralize all threats. But to NATO, it's just a flashing, once again, nuanced sign of insecurity. You don't build a project this massive unless you're scared out of your mind. And NATO's reaction? Not panic, not surrender, nothing. Just let them build, let them waste money. At least for now. Instead, the Baltic states and Poland mind their own business and boost their own defenses. The US plans more missile deployments in Germany. The alliance treats the radar not as a wall, but just as a giant target that would be taken out the moment war breaks out. Here is the irony. In trying to project dominance, Moscow broadcasts weakness. A giant radar station in Kaliningrad does not scream power, it screams desperation. It is the equivalent of a homeowner installing 50 cameras and barbed wire fences, not because he's powerful, but because he's terrified of being robbed. No one, would get out of their way to install such security if the most expensive item you can lose is a TV. But if you store gold in your basement, diamonds in the safe, stacks of cash under mattresses, then yes, you would probably want to be a little bit more on the safe side, right? And the thieves know it too. It's a little extra work for them to get through all these defenses, but the reward is definitely worth it. And in the background, Putin himself admits he does not want an arms race, that Russia prefers diplomacy. But if that were true, why build the most aggressive radar project in Europe since the Cold War? Why pour billions into a system that will never make ordinary Russians richer, safer, freer? The answer is simple. This is not about defense, it's about symbolism. Russia needs to show it is still a player, even if that player is broke, bleeding and hated by its neighbors. Now let's flip the script. Forget Lavrov, forget Putin, forget NATO generals with their PowerPoint slides. What about the people who actually live in Kaliningrad? The fishermen, the students, the families stuck between Moscow's paranoia and NATO's threats. Their voices are the ones drowned out by the roar of propaganda. And they tell a very different story. Kaliningrad is not Moscow. It is not Siberia. It is a region that breathes Europe. Its people cross into Poland and Lithuania for shopping, study, work, even buy groceries. At least the ones who still can. Its culture has more in common with Gdansk than with Smolensk. For years, many in Kaliningrad quietly dreamed of closer integration with Europe, even independence. They saw themselves as Europeans trapped on a Russian cage. And now, with the war raging in Ukraine, those dreams have only intensified. Life in Kaliningrad has gotten worse. Sanctions choke trade, tourism collapsed, prices rise while wages stagnate. And every time Lavrov rants about defending Kaliningrad, locals just simply at least roll their eyes, because they know they're the ones who are paying the price. They do not want to be Russia's sacrificial pawn in geopolitical PP measuring contest. Talk to ordinary people there and you will hear the same story. This war is meaningless, it is not our fight. We do not support Putin and his invasion. While Moscow pumps billions into radar systems and nuclear posturing, Kaliningraders worry about groceries, jobs, and keeping their kids from being drafted into a war they never wanted. They know NATO is not coming to burn their homes. They know the real threat comes from Moscow, dragging them into conflict after conflict. And here is the bitter truth Lavrov will never admit. Probably neither in Moscow, in Kremlin either. If tomorrow a referendum were held, a shocking number of Kaliningraders would probably choose independence or at least autonomy linked with Europe. They see themselves less as Russia's fortress and more as hostages in somebody else's war game. To them, Lavrov is not a defender of Kaliningrad. Probably never even be there for several years, if ever. He's a delusional old man making their lives worse with every speech. Lavrov can scream all he wants about NATO's aggression, about decisive response, about Kaliningrad as Russia's sacred fortress. He can even build radars the size of cities and paint the Baltic as a battlefield, but none of it changes the underlying truth. Russia's victim complex is wearing thin. Kaliningrad is more vulnerable than powerful. The giant radar is a monument to insecurity, and the people of Kaliningrad themselves do not buy his lies. What is happening today is not the West declaring war on Russia. It is Russia declaring war on reality. And the residents of Kaliningrad are probably among the first ones to truly see through the BS of Russian propaganda. And that is the real threat to the Kremlin. Not NATO tanks, not European sanctions, but the possibility that one day the people Lavrov claims to defend will finally say, "We've had enough, this is not our war, we don't want to be part of your Russia anymore." Kaliningrad first, Siberia second, Buryatia third. And then who knows which other regions are quietly dreaming about Putin-less Russia. Well, there you have it, guys. As promised, right here next to me is the summary of the video made by PLAUD Notepin. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel. If you want to support my work, there are links down below. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks so much PLAUD for sponsoring this video, and see you on Tuesday.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe